Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Air Commodore Richard Keir. We warmly welcome the family of Corporal John Joseph Flanagan, whose story will be told shortly by Air Commodore Richard Keir, who is the great-nephew of Corporal Flanagan. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Corporal John Joseph Flanagan. John Joseph Flanagan was born on the 28th of February 1910 in Cassillis, Victoria, one of 6 children born to Michael and Catherine Flanagan. Known as Jack to his family and friends, Flanagan grew up in Melbourne and worked as an investigator in the tax department. Flanagan's father, Michael, passed away when Jack was only 9 years old, and he was brought up by his mother and older siblings. At the time of his enlistment, he was living in Malvern in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. He was engaged to Mary Sheila Billings of Glen Iris, a nearby suburb. Before the war, Flanagan gained valuable military service by serving in the 3rd Divisional Signals of the Citizen Military Force. Flanagan enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 2nd of July 1940. He was following in the footsteps of his older brother, Matthew, who had enlisted in the Army in December 1939 and served in the Middle East. Jack Flanagan began his initial training with the 6th Training Battalion at Mount Martha on the Mornington Peninsula, and in July 1940 transferred to the 8th Divisional Petrol Company at Seymour. He continued to train with his unit until July 1941, when he transferred once again to the 27th Brigade Australian Army Service Corps. His unit was later redesignated the 2nd Australian Army Service Corps Company of the 8th Division. The Army Service Corps played a vital role in the war by providing much-needed supplies and logistical support to troops in the field. Throughout his period of training, Flanagan showed himself to be a capable soldier. He was promoted to the rank of Acting Corporal in January 1941, and this rank was confirmed in August, the month that he sailed from Australia for service in Singapore. Flanagan was one of the thousands of Australian troops sent to Singapore and the Malay Peninsula throughout 1941 and early 1942 in anticipation of a Japanese attack. He served in support of troops of the 27th Brigade, and when the Japanese invasion came, he supported Australian troops as they made a fighting retreat south through Malaya and eventually onto Singapore Island. Due to the chaotic nature of the fighting at the time, it is difficult to ascertain Flanagan's exact movements during the fall of Singapore. He was likely either serving with an ammunition dump or in a composite company of support soldiers brought together to bolster the Australian Defence Force. Regardless of his exact role, he was one of 130,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers, including 15,000 Australians, taken as prisoners of war by the Japanese after the surrender of Singapore on the 15th of February 1942. In the aftermath of the Allied surrender on Singapore, many families did not learn the fate of their loved ones fighting abroad. Flanagan was initially reported as missing, and it was not until many months later that his family received confirmation that he was a prisoner of war. Flanagan's mother, Catherine, never found out what happened to her son. She had passed away on the 27th of February 1942, less than 2 weeks after the surrender. It is unlikely that Flanagan ever found out that his mother had died. Flanagan was interred in the Changi prisoner of war camp in Singapore until May 1942. There he was assigned to A-Force, a working party of approximately 6,000 Australian and British soldiers sent to work on the notorious Thai-Burma Railway. Conditions for prisoners on the Thai-Burma Railway were terrible, and many Allied prisoners of war suffered from disease, starvation and mistreatment by Japanese guards. After having endured the hardships on the Thai-Burma Railway for over a year, Flanagan needed treatment for tropical ulcers. On the 15th of August 1943, he died from septicemia, a blood infection likely contracted from the operation, during which one of his legs had to be removed. He was 33 years old. His remains now lie in the Tan Bai U Zayat Cemetery in Thailand, along with over 3,770 Allied soldiers of the Second World War. His family did not learn of his death until 1945 and left this epitaph on his grave: dearly loved and sadly missed by his brothers and sisters, rest in peace. His fiancée, Mary, left messages in local newspapers declaring her grief at her lost love. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal John Joseph Flanagan, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.